What's going on, everybody? Welcome in. It's the Sharp Angles podcast, and we've got a great one for you today. Sam Yarnell, Rich Hribar, Warren Sharp. We're going to break down a bunch of stuff that's coming up in just about 10 days here, just under 10 days, in fact, at this point with the NFL draft. Lots of predictions to give out, lots of team needs to talk about. We're going to go through 8 super important teams with relation to their draft capital, their strength of schedule, lots of things like that. But remember, if we talk about a team that you aren't necessarily interested in, then maybe you'll learn something new. If we don't talk about a team that you are particularly interested in, make sure you're checking out their mock draft, their draft needs, all of their analysis over on sharpfootball.com. We'll have predictions for all 32 of the NFL teams. We'll have draft needs, predictions. Ryan McChrystal's got his new mock draft 4.0. That's out now live as well. Make sure you're checking it all out. Sharpfootballanalysis.com. Rich, Warren, how are we doing today, guys? How are we feeling on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon?
Feeling good. I mean, I'm feeling better than Rich. Rich has been cranking through all of the team needs pieces, going through all 32 teams. Where you at, Rich? Like 26 by now? 25?
Yeah, we're in the final week of them, so we had to do 3 a day for tomorrow. So I did 3 today, and doing 3 was different than 2. But I only have 5 left. I don't know how many Ray has left, but I only have 5 left.
So these are. I mean, you guys got to go check them out over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Some of the most in-depth roster breakdowns. What I love the way that Rich and Ray do these is they take a look at the current roster as it exists, try to identify the needs, understand any moving parts that have occurred, and really dive into some of the stats and the nuggets as to what made these teams the way that they were last year and what they need to get out of the draft this year, what holes that they still have. And so it's probably been a labor of love. The good part is you guys are almost done, only 5 left for you, but all 32 teams are up there. And as Sam indicated at the top, we're going to be walking through a number of these teams, but we're certainly not going to be able to cover all of them on this show. So you guys need to head over to Sharp Football Analysis and check out whatever your favorite team is. They're going to have every single one of those in-depth articles up there very soon.
Sharpfootballanalysis.com. Check us out on social media, Sharp Football Analysis as well. Always bringing you guys all the most important content with regard to analytics and as much edge as you could possibly have in the NFL. Guys, let's get into it, and let's get into our very first team. We got to talk about some of these teams with limited draft capital and these teams that are considered contenders and that we've seen have continued success over the last couple of years, but they might not necessarily be in the best position to add to that or do what they may need to do. Obviously, a team that screams this, the Dallas Cowboys. They've got 7 picks in this year's draft. It'll start at the end of the first round, or at least it's slated to right now with number 24 overall, barring any movement or any trades like that. This is a team that lost Tony Pollard. They released Michael Gallup. They're missing a lot of offensive firepower. Obviously, you've still got your stars in your CeeDee Lamb, in your Dak Prescott. But Rich, I guess for you, from a fantasy angle, when you miss out on a guy from a fantasy perspective that so many people were so high on last season in Tony Pollard going into the year, and obviously the letdown that he has now not even on the team anymore, how are you looking at the Cowboys from a fantasy angle going into the draft?
I mean, well, right now, just from a pure fantasy lens, it's really just CeeDee Lamb. That's all I got. This is all they've got right now on the roster. And you look at the Cowboys from a top-down perspective. I mean, they're in such a nebulous spot because of they have 3 mega contracts on the horizon. You know, obviously, right now, CeeDee Lamb's playing on his 5th-year option. He's coming off of a career high 135 catches. His targets, yards, and catches have gone up every year of his career so far. And, him having 135 catches right in the 11th hour as his contract's expiring, I'm sure Jerry's not too happy with that. He's happy and sad at the same time. You got Dak in the final year of his contract. Dak's only 31. He was second in MVP voting. And you've got Micah Parsons. Like, these are 3 mega contracts that have to get paid out. And it'd be fine if you say, like, all right, well, the rest of this roster is kind of short up. But you kind of alluded to it. It's not. They don't have any running backs on the roster with any NFL experience. I mean, Rico Dowdle has 113 career touches. Malik Davis, 44. Deuce Vaughn, 30 career touches. Snoop Connor has 12 touches. That's all that's on the roster. After CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks is on the final year of his contract. He hasn't even hit 800 yards receiving the past 2 years. He's going to be 31 years old. They have the ghost of Martavis Bryant on the roster. He hasn't even caught a pass in the NFL in the last 4 years, but he's 32 years old. And then Tyron Smith leaves the team. Zach Martin's going to be 34 this November. Like, this team is just a plethora of holes. Trayvon Diggs is coming off of an ACL surgery. They didn't bring back Stephon Gilmore. It's just littered with holes everywhere, and it's talent. There's talented players at the top, but man, this team is paper thin in the depth department.
You mentioned Tyron Smith leaving, and I think that actually speaks obviously to their betting odds for first position drafted. It's favored to be an offensive lineman over on MGM at -175, which, when we talk about having a guy like Rico Dowdle and Deuce Vaughn being the two mainstays in your running back room right now, I think that that's very interesting that we don't even get running back listed in the top 5 odds in terms of position that this team could take. A very interesting development. Now, Warren, when we talk about this team's strength of schedule, they're hung at 10.5, their win total, with plus money to the over, or even money to the over, I should say. What do we kind of take away from this after past seasons where it feels like the Cowboys, they just kind of melt down at the end of the season?
Yeah, that's a recurring theme as it relates to the Dallas Cowboys, is a meltdown. Like you mentioned, their win total is up a little bit, implied juice at 10.4, up from 10 last year. But last year they played the 3rd easiest schedule. This year they played the 11th toughest schedule. That's the number 2 largest year-over-year increase in schedule difficulty. And most of the teams that they played last year disappointed across the board. Only 5 of the 17 games that they played last year were against teams that actually exceeded their win total expectations. So they played a lot of teams last season that were quite disappointing. This year, they're scheduled to play 10 games versus teams that will have a winning record based on win total projections, 11 of these teams that they'll play this year had winning records last season. Last season, they were bullies. We'll talk about a few teams that were bullies here. They went 9-1 versus non-playoff teams, but only 3-4 versus playoff teams. And they were terrible on the road. They went 0-4 on the road versus playoff teams, losing by 15 points per game. They also, kind of like Rich is talking about, where are they going to turn in the draft? You mentioned running back, you mentioned offensive lineman. Well, they have the lowest draft capital of any year since 2019. So the last 4 or 5 years, they haven't had draft capital this poor. But the biggest impediment, in my opinion, the thing that I'm most interested in, will they do something in terms of an extension, or will this just be it, is Dak Prescott's cap hit. The Cowboys have had this non-discussed luxury for a couple of decades now, where their QB1 has not eaten up a lot of the cap. And I'm going to tweet out later today a listing going all the way back to 2007 as to what their quarterback 1 cap hit has been. But suffice it to say, Tony Romo came in, was unheralded. He's kind of like a diamond in the rough. They all of a sudden found him. They started paying him, and right before his cap hit was supposed to take off, he gets injured. And that's when Dak Prescott, who was like a low-round draft pick, ends up coming in. And Dak Prescott, his first few years, he's making $500,000, $0.7 million on his rookie deal, counting against the cap. He was tagged 1 time, but this is going to be the first time that the Dallas Cowboys, for an actual rostered quarterback, have had a cap hit in excess of $27 million, not excluding the franchise tag, in their history. And he's going to go from $26.8 million cap hit last year all the way up to $55.5 million this year. So Dak's now eating up a ton of the cap. You weren't having success against good teams that you played last year. You're not winning games when you're on the road. You don't have a lot of draft capital to work with, but you do have some clear areas of need. This is where I think what Rich broke down as it relates to the Dallas Cowboys roster needs are going to come into play a ton this year, because they have to really figure out those key positions that are going to actually make a difference for them. Because otherwise, I'm not going to say they're going to be in trouble this year, like they're going to produce a losing record, but they're certainly not going to do anything surprising this season unless they really can replace 1 or 2 key positions via the draft or at the back end here of free agency.
I think it makes a lot of sense why Mike McCarthy is in the situation that he's found himself in with Jerry Jones, right? How Jerry has come out and said, it's got to be a Super Bowl this year, buddy, or else you're done. From everything that you just said, Warren, and the year-over-year progression of this team, it's just continually nonsensical almost how they're stuck in this rut with as much talent. And now, obviously, like you said, the cap table is going to come and bite them in the rear end.
There's a reason they haven't spent any money in free agency, because they can't. They're not allowed. Right. They can't do it.
Well, when your quarterback is taking up 1/5 of your entire team's cap, unless you're talking about a Pat Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, I think we can all agree that you're going to find yourself in some sort of predicament at some point, unless you've got, T. Higgins and someone else on a rookie deal, or Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, like the Bengals had at that point. We'll talk about another team with no relative draft capital. We talked about how the Cowboys have none in 7 picks. A team that has less than them is the Miami Dolphins, who have 6. Their first round pick a little higher than the Cowboys. They'll pick in the first round at 21 overall, but this is a team that lost a ton this offseason on both sides of the ball. You lose Robert Hunt in the offensive line. You lose Christian Wilkins in the defensive line. You lose Xavier Howard, Andrew Van Ginkel, Brandon Jones, Raekwon Davis. So obviously that defense has been torn up, and they've brought in some new faces, Jordan Poyer. But offensively, when we talk about draft value for this team, they're favored to take an offensive line and it's assumed to try and replace Robert Hunt. Do we think, Rich, that this drafting an offensive lineman or bolstering that offensive line, how much do we think that impacts the value of these dynamic weapons that we see in this Miami offense between Tyreek, Raheem, Devin Achane, all of those guys? How do we think that bolstering that offensive line can impact the skill position players' values?
Yeah, it's going to be pretty massive if they can get this thing fixed. Now, one thing I can say by going through these teams and writing all these rosters up, and I've been doing it the last couple of years, is just taking an offensive lineman doesn't mean you fix your offensive line. There's a number of guys that I've written up, like guys like Evan Neal, like Trevor Penning, like guys like were taken in the first round like 2 years ago. They're done. Like they're not even set up to start 2 years later. We'll see what happens with like Ike Mekwonu for the Panthers. Like he was awful last year. So like just taking a lineman doesn't mean, even high first round capital, doesn't mean that you're out of the weeds. But the Dolphins kind of have to address this with the limited capital that they have. I mean, their most frequently used offensive line combination was only on the field for 16.9% of their snaps last year. Only the Jets had a lower rate of their highest played offensive line. And to compound matters, they, like you mentioned, they lose 2 starters from last year, Robert Hunt and Connor Williams. Terron Armstead's been excellent, right? He's been excellent his whole NFL career, but he now has played 11 seasons. He's missed multiple games in all but one of them. He's never played a complete season. Like he's great when he's on the field, but you have to account for him even missing time. You look at Tua, he doesn't get pressured a lot because the ball comes out so fast, but when pressure does get to Tua, he has been one of the most impacted quarterbacks. Last year, he was 28th in the NFL in rating under pressure. Only Will Levis and Bryce Young completed a lower percentage of their passes under pressure than Tua. Now, his pressure rate was totally different than those 2 guys, again, because the ball's coming out. But it is a huge deal that he's impacted by it. And then you talk about just kind of some of the depth on this roster. I mean, even after Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, who they have to pay coming up, they also have to pay Tua coming up. This wide receiver room just falls off of a cliff. Like Braxton Berrios is like kind of a career special teams player, like an ancillary guy. You can't run an offense through him. And they kind of need wide receiver depth too. So the Dolphins need a lot of things. Then on the defensive side, they've got all these moving parts. They're basically playing a musical chairs game on defense. They lose Van Ginkel and Jerome Baker. They replace them with Jordan Brooks and Anthony Walker. They release Xavier Howard. They replace him with Kendall Fuller. They lose Christian Wilkins in free agency because, again, they've got these pending pipeline contracts coming up. When we talked about the Cowboys, the Dolphins are in the same boat. No draft capital. Tua's coming up. Waddle's coming up. Javon Holland's coming up that you have to pay. And what do you do here? Like, what moves do you make? And this is like Warren's going to hit on. This is a team that literally like has thumped bad teams the past 2 years under Mike McDaniel. And anytime they've played a good team, they kind of look like a pretty anemic team.
100%. 100%. If you want to find out all about what Rich is talking about with regard to the fantasy aspect and if the Dolphins do take an offensive lineman, how that will affect their many skill position players that are incredibly rostered across leagues and across formats, make sure that you've got your dynasty fantasy, that you've got your Sharp fantasy football draft kit. Whether you're looking for season long, dynasty, best ball, the Sharp fantasy football draft kit, it is one of the best tools in the game. It helps you find all the advanced analytics, find the data, uncover the edges, build those best rosters, win those leagues, win those best ball formats. And hey, by the way, use promo code SAVE5 for $5 off at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Build that winning roster. Get your Sharp football draft kit today. Warren, when we talk about these Miami Dolphins, and Rich really just alluded to it, it's a tale as old as time with Mike McDaniel. He looks like a superpower against your Denver Broncos, but then you put him up against the Buffalo Bills and he shrivels up. When you put him against these teams that are weak, he has this innate ability to come out and dominate. But anytime that there's a high-level player or a high-level coach across the sidelines from him, he seems to get nervous and almost get too conservative in his play callings with an electric offense. What do you take away from not only their projected wins and their win total this year, the past from Mike McDaniel and his history with kind of ending these seasons on such a sour note?
Yeah, it's frustrating. I mean, I think the Dolphins have a tremendous opportunity this year, but I'm very worried about the Miami Dolphins at the same time because I just don't know unless they make some changes to how they're actually executing. Their ability to step up in class clearly has been lacking, and I don't know that I see a sudden solution due to the lack of draft capital, and they haven't really brought anybody in who's going to make that difference for them. So it's got to come from within, and it's got to be from a coaching, a game planning, or a preparation or an in-game adjustment perspective. And so let's just go through some of the issues that they've had. Last year, okay, they played the 8th easiest schedule. And this year they've got the 8th easiest schedule, which, by the way, we're talking a lot about strength of schedule as I'm talking through these teams. That's because I just wrote up a detailed article about 2024 projected strength of schedule. Keep in mind, we don't use 2023 win-loss record to help predict the upcoming strength of schedule. You want to use a future-looking model to help predict your strength of schedule. I prefer to utilize win totals posted up in Las Vegas sports books, and that way my win totals and forecasted strength of schedule will be ever changing throughout the course of this offseason. So I'll continue to update the article multiple times. I'll update it in the book, which we're working on, the 2024 football preview book. Everybody loves 2023, 2022. Go to the website, sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can pre-order your 2024 preview book that will have over 500 pages dissecting everything you need to know about all these teams and what I expect they will do for this upcoming season. The Dolphins' schedule does not get any easier this year. It was 8th easiest last year, 8th easiest this year. They played a ton of teams last year that were disappointments. Only 4 games did they play last year where they faced an opponent who actually exceeded their win total that season. So they played a lot of teams that just were not very good or were not exceeding expectations last year. And they bullied the hell out of most of those teams. They went 10-1 versus teams that missed the playoffs. They won those games by 18 points on average, an 18-point margin. But when they played the 6 teams that had winning records, 6 playoff teams last year, they went 1-5 in those games. They lost by 15 points per game. So we're talking about going from winning by 18 to losing by 15 points per game. That doesn't even include a nearly 20-point loss to the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs, where their offense only scored 7 points. In 2024, they're now going to play 10 games versus teams that produced a winning record last season. 9 of those teams are supposed to produce winning records this upcoming season based upon strength of schedule. And they have the second lowest draft capital of any team this season, which is nothing new to the Dolphins. If you're a Dolphins fan, you know that your team has had the league's lowest draft capital each of the last 2 seasons. And now you've got the second lowest draft capital. But I do think that you've got a big opportunity this season. And that's simply because look at the Patriots, likely new quarterback, new head coach. The Bills are trying to figure out how to navigate their own quarterback's cap hit. And the Bills, they've had 6 straight years where Josh Allen, you know this, Sam, that's your team, 6 straight years where Josh Allen's hit the cap for $19 million or less. This year he goes up to $30 million. Next year it's up to $60 million. And then the Jets obviously are a team. They're supposed to win a bunch of games with Aaron Rodgers coming back. The Dolphins are 11-2 against the Jets in the last 13 games. I mean, the Dolphins have had a ton of success playing against the Jets, but there's an opportunity in this division. The Dolphins haven't won a playoff game in God knows how long. This needs to be the year. The way that they need to start, though, is figuring out how to better play on the road. And it's egregious the way that they play at home. And I know they got the heat and the sun and the humidity, and that's to their advantage. They've won 73% of their home games over the last 3 years. That's the 3rd highest win rate at home in the entire NFL. But on the road, they've only won 40% of their games the last 3 years. That gap of 33 percentage points from home versus road, that's the 2nd largest gap of any team in the NFL. Only the Cleveland Browns have a larger gap. So the way that it can start for the Dolphins is just coach better, strategize better, get your team to play better on the road. By winning an extra game or two on the road that you've been losing over the last 3 years, boom, all of a sudden you're in that conversation for the AFC East champion. But in order to actually make a run through the playoffs, like I know that they're hoping to do, and that Mike McDaniel wants to do, I mean, they've got to fix some things with this team, and they're not going to be able to do a whole lot to the roster just based upon where they sit cap-wise.
I think that you bring up some interesting points, Warren, and I wanted to kind of spin those to Rich, because when we talk about a team having these systemic struggles like the Dolphins have, specifically on the road, how do we kind of attack that from a fantasy lens? It feels like there's a huge window there when we know that these players are just not playable on the road or whatever the case may be. And then furthermore, when we're talking about the draft, Rich, and the Dolphins presumably taking an offensive lineman, as it looks in many ways like they will, is this a time, do you think, that people should potentially reevaluate their dynasty lineups and think about what the Dolphins kind of could mean to that team for years to come if McDaniel can't figure this out?
Well, from a dynasty stance, this is like everyone's dynasty Super Bowl. Like, this is what we live for, you know, because you get so many things that impact and have just ripple effects on the rest of your roster. You know, you have surprises, you know, where you might have a really good player that looks like in a prime opportunity kind of get thwarted. We see that happen all the time. So this is always the best weekend coming up, you know, for dynasty football. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the home road stuff, like from like a fantasy stance, or even like Warren, I think would agree from a gambling stance, like there is some noise in some of that stuff. But with the Dolphins, like in particularly, especially their early season, you know, home stuff, because it's, first of all, that home stadium's cheating. It shouldn't be allowed. It shouldn't be allowed. I'm sure people have seen this, but like for those of you that don't know, the Dolphins stadium is set up to where there's shade that covers the entire field except for the opponent's sideline. And it's fine when you get to like December, right? And like the weather's not as bad, but like these September games, if you look at like the Miami splits, like in September at home, like they're just like, they're astronomical in favor of them. I don't know how that's not, like from a competition stance, it's even allowed to be a thing. But yeah, a lot of the times for fantasy though and stuff, like it's still a case by case basis, but that stadium should be outlawed.
Well, I'll just say, like, I think, look, if you're building a pool at your house, you want to take into consideration like how you're going to lay it out so the sun hits it in the right time of day and that sort of thing. And so it should be no different. Like for years, that's why I don't understand Buffalo. Buffalo is they understand that passing wins games. They had Josh Allen. He has a big arm. And then they go to like bid on a new stadium, and they weren't thinking about, well, that's a whole topic for another day. Sam's probably got some opinions on that. But the bottom line is take into consideration the elements when you're spending millions of dollars on a stadium. I think it is a great way to gain an advantage, and it is a decided advantage. But I don't think it's quite to the extent of cheating. But I love it. I love it. I think it's great for the Dolphins. Good for them for thinking of that. Good for them for thinking. Consider this: the alternative would have been, what if they didn't think about it and they put their own team standing in the sun the whole time? I mean, that would just be embarrassing. So at least they did it the right way.
Well, I think the 49ers new stadium, like, basically is like just terrible for the fans, right? Like, they didn't even take into account, like, everyone's just in the sun.
Oh my gosh. At least in Florida, they're not playing in a baseball stadium anymore. That's all that matters. Rich mentioned that the draft is like one of the biggest times of the year for all of the Dynasty fantasy owners. If you're looking for Dynasty fantasy football rankings, rookie rankings, projections for the 2024 season, and much, much more, make sure you get your Sharp Football fantasy draft kit. The Sharp fantasy football draft kit features advanced analytics. It's got data. It helps you uncover all edges to set the best lineups, win those leagues, and use promo code SAVE5. You get $5 off. SharpFootballAnalysis.com. Get your Sharp fantasy football draft kit today. Guys, let's move on from these teams with limited draft capital and these contenders that need to improve in the Dolphins and the Cowboys. And let's just talk about some bad teams, because bad teams are fun this time of year, especially when they've got a lot of draft capital. And a team that has 11 picks in this year's draft is the Arizona Cardinals, the dumpster fire Arizona Cardinals of the last 2 years. They've got the 4th overall pick, and there are a ton of different directions they can go with this. You see it on the screen there. Up at the top in draft value, in first 3 rounds draft value. This is a team in the Cardinals. They've got a ton of potential to go whatever direction they really want to this offseason. The only real key loss for them was Hollywood Brown, obviously heading over to Kansas City to try and bolster that wide receiver room. But Rich, when we talk about a really great spot for a team to take one of the countless skill position players, one of the countless fantasy football stars that we know are in this draft, the Cardinals may be in a better position than any team. They know they've got their quarterback. There's a ton of wide receiver capital, and they know the 3 teams right before them are probably going to take quarterbacks, barring something crazy happening. How do you look at the Cardinals before the draft from a fantasy perspective and try to attack them in different ways to get them in your lineup?
The Cardinals are in a really interesting spot because obviously they're in the most screaming spot for a trade down, right? Like, everyone's saying, go quarterback. They could trade down for the next team that wants to either come up and reach on a, JJ McCarthy or make a move for, jump Joe Alt, like try to get one of those guys. But then when you look at the Cardinals and you say, yeah, I don't think any of us would frown upon, trading down, getting more picks, accumulating picks. But also, like, the Cardinals have to start making some moves as well. I mean, Kyler Murray, the theme of the show, I think, has been kind of like where teams are with these quarterback contracts. And Arizona has missed their grace period with Kyler Murray. He now has a cap hit of $43 million or more in each of the next five seasons. The Cardinals really don't have a realistic out year without a significant cap penalty. Now, they can always just pull the plug like any team can, but they don't really have a realistic out without significant penalty until 2026. And when you look at Kyler Murray, his best stretch of playing football as a pro so far has when he played with an alpha wide receiver in DeAndre Hopkins. So you look at Arizona's wide receivers. I mean, they're 30th in catches last year, 30th in receiving yards. They're 23rd in touchdowns. They've traded for Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins under Kyler Murray, but the only wide receivers they've taken with top 100 capital have been Andy Isabella, Rondale Moore, and Michael Wilson. So it's one thing to say, like, we keep acquiring picks, right? But the Cardinals are no guaranteed to get back up there. Everyone's favorite thing is the Cardinals trade out and then trade back in, like, to get Marvin Harrison. Like, you can't always have your cake and eat it too. Like, you can get your stockpile of picks, but like, what if the Chargers don't want to trade, right? Like, what if the Chargers wanted Marvin Harrison? Like, there's all these things that, like, you just can't account for. Like, on paper, in a perfect world, you say this was going to work out for the Cardinals, but they have all this draft capital. Like, you have to start getting Kyler Murray, like, actual weapons outside of Trey McBride right now. And then they just have a ton of other needs too, as well. I mean, this secondary is Sean Murphy Bunting is their number 1 cornerback right now. They also were 24th in pressure rate. They were 30th in sacks a year ago. Like, this team has a lot of needs and a lot of capital, but they also are paying Kyler Murray now $40 million access a year. They have to get him actual weapons because they're invested in him.
Warren, when we talk about strength of schedule for this team, I don't even know how to look at it, how to analyze it at all, because this is a team in the Cardinals that it feels like year over year, we continue to talk about their weaponry, talk about the Kyler Murray effect, so on and so forth. And it's letdown after letdown with them. Obviously, the Kyler injury is something no one can account for. But how do we go about analyzing this team's win total? You're seeing right here strength of schedule on the screen, and the Cardinals right there in the middle. 16th. It does not get, it gets only easier and only harder from there. They're as mid as you could be in terms of that. How do we break down this strength of schedule for Arizona?
The problem with the Arizona Cardinals, especially when you're trying to pre-flop bet them, is always going to be, will Kyler Murray even be available at the end of the season? Now, we know last year it was off of an injury, so he was starting late. But for every single other season, it's always been, what am I going to get out of Kyler Murray the last month of the season, the last 6 weeks of the season? And it's the similar thing to what a lot of Lamar Jackson haters have said historically. Oh, Lamar's never around at the end of the season. Well, Kyler Murray has been similar. And last season to this season, when we're looking at strength of schedule, they played the fourth toughest schedule last year. This year, they're going to play league average. That's actually the fourth largest year-over-year improvement in schedule ease. That's a positive for the Arizona Cardinals this year because last season they played 13 games versus teams that finished above 500 last year, the number 2 highest total in the NFL. They played 10 games versus teams that made the playoffs. Only the Cincinnati Bengals in NFL history have played more. So this year they've got opportunities. Rich mentioned they own the number 1 most draft capital. It's the most that their team has held in over 25 years. Only one team has used more draft capital in the last 3 years than what the Arizona Cardinals currently hold. I hear what Rich is saying, that you want to get your guy at number 4 overall. I kind of like a win-win scenario where they trade just a couple spots down with the New York Giants. Sorry, the landscapers here doing some crap out there. I kind of like the idea of the trade down to the New York Giants. That number 4 pick is highly coveted due to the way that the quarterbacks seem to be falling in those first 3 picks. Somebody comes up, they're going to take a quarterback number 4, then you just have to worry about who's drafting at number 5. Could they potentially take the guy that you want if you go down to number 6? And then you can keep stockpiling draft capital in future years while still having probably the most draft capital of any team in the draft this season. They drafted Kyler Murray at number 1 overall in 2019. They got more draft capital this year than 2019. Last year, they drafted Paris Johnson Jr. at number 6 overall. They got more draft capital this year than in that draft as well. They have 3 picks in the first 35 overall. They have a ton of needs, as Rich said. They're not a great team. But the good news for them is that if I'm a coach of the Arizona Cardinals, I'm going to be loving it because the expectations are pretty low for my team. We've got a ton of draft capital. So I'm able to build this team in my likeness, in my image, right? They did that a little bit last year because they had a lot of draft capital last year. They got even more this year. And then they got to buy themselves a lifeline. Eventually, they're going to have to figure out, how do we win games with a quarterback who is costing us a lot of money but not producing at the level at which we're having to pay him against the salary cap, comparable to other quarterbacks in the NFL. And that's really what this league comes down to. Can you get quarterback production at a level that is at or below what you have to eat on the cap with the quarterback that you have? And if the answer is no, we can't get that production, and it doesn't matter how expensive your quarterback is. If you have a rookie quarterback on a rookie deal contract, but he absolutely sucks, that's not going to help you. If you've got a quarterback who's the 3rd highest paid quarterback in the NFL at a ton of money, and he's not performing to that level, that's not going to help you. It doesn't matter what you're paying the guy. He's got to perform above what you're paying him, and that is the code. Most of the time it happens on those rookie deals. So I'm excited to see what Arizona can do this year because I think that they've got a lot of options and very low expectations. But at the end of the day, it's going to hinge on whether Kyler Murray can remain healthy all 17 games. And like Rich said, what other weapons can they surround him with? Because the cupboard is relatively barren there.
Even more barren without Hollywood Brown. When we talk about all of these teams that we've talked about so far, like Rich mentioned, there's been a consistent theme of paying these quarterbacks a ton and getting caught in not necessarily the best spot in whatever contract that may be. Obviously, Dax being the worst. A player who is not yet at that point with their team is Justin Herbert. So let's buck the trend a little bit. Let's talk about the Los Angeles Chargers, because this is a team with a ton of draft capital and a ton of needs now. They've got 9 picks in the draft. The losses are countless for this team. Every fantasy football player besides Justin Herbert that you had that was on the Chargers, they're all gone. Eckler, Williams, Everett, Keenan Allen. There's no Los Angeles Charger weaponry left. And that's when, like we were just talking about with the 4th pick, the 5th pick really becomes valuable with regard to the wide receivers, and talking about Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and then a tier down to Rome Odunze. Guys, and specifically Rich, again, I'll start with you. This is a team that, by the book right now, is favored to take an offensive lineman. But it feels to me like if they do that, they're just giving up this one cheap year they have of Justin Herbert before his contract starts to explode. That seems nonsensical to me.
Yeah, I mean, it seems nonsensical till you get into the hood with Jim Harbaugh. But I mean, they have not used a top 30 visit on an offensive lineman yet. They have not. So like that's one thing to keep an eye on. It doesn't mean that it doesn't preclude them from taking a guy. They probably don't need to visit Joe Alt if they want to take Joe Alt. But the Chargers have not used a visit on an offensive lineman yet. So definitely keep an eye on that. Whereas some of the teams we talked about, like they've clearly looked at a lot of the team needs they had. Like the Cowboys have had every running back in for a visit, like just about now. Like they have like 6 different guys.
Yeah,
but I mean,
all 3 of them.
The Chargers are in a spot where, kind of like the Cardinals, like they're going to have to pay Herbert. You know, his mega hit starts next year, right? He goes from 37 to 46, 58, 71 through 2028 $1 million against the cap hit. But this team has so many needs. It's another spot where you're like, the Chargers have to trade down, right? Like this is just another team that looks like they need to trade down. And then you look at their wide receiver room, right? Obviously they traded, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. They only have 4 wide receivers right now on the team. Like right now, if there was a wide receiver meeting today, the Chargers would have 4 dudes in the room just hanging out. And 2 of them, Josh Palmer and Simi Fieko, are not under contract next year. Their contract expires this season. They took a wide receiver in round 1 last year, Quentin Johnston. Abject disaster. He was a volatile player anyways. Into college, he was a guy that was probably going to be kind of boomer busty. And then he's only played 1 year. There's more to be written about him. But you look up just his ranks among rookie wide receivers last year. He was 5th among all rookies in routes run, but 18th in target rate per route. He was 12th in receiving yardage, 18th in yards per route run. He was 13th in touchdowns. At the end of the year, we saw guys like Alec Erickson playing over him in this offense when they should have just been trotting him out there every snap and getting him targets. So this is a team that just needs everything again. Joshua Kelly's gone from the roster. Eckler's gone from the roster. Top 2 rushers from last year. They just don't have anything. It's so like when you look at that, you say, all right, we've got to just trade down, accumulate more picks maybe. You look at their defense. They were 19th in pressure rate last year. They were 28th in yards allowed per pass attempt, 26th in EPA per dropback allowed. Like this team just needs so much that, taking Joe Alt would be just a supreme luxury that I don't think this team has, right? Because you already have Rashawn Slater at left tackle who you're going to pay. Are you going to have Joe Alt then play his whole rookie contract right tackle? Probably not. I mean, I understand it's Jim Harbaugh and it's Greg Roman, but like it absolutely makes no sense for them to take an offensive lineman at 5.
We talk so much about Jim Harbaugh, and, you're alluding to it, Rich, that hard-nosed style of football that he takes wherever he goes across the sport. I think that the strength of schedule that we're talking about for these Los Angeles Chargers, and when you look at their draft capital versus strength of schedule, they're a top 5 team in both. This is a team that has the 4th best draft capital and the 2nd easiest strength of schedule. Warren, is that why the numbers that we're seeing projected on the Chargers are so high right now?
I think it probably is. I do want to go back and talk to Rich's point. The biggest pushback that I get when I tweet out Ryan McChrystal's mock drafts is that he has the Chargers taking Joe Alt. And all the Chargers fans absolutely detest that pick. They hate it. They want to come with pitchforks and send terroristic threats because they absolutely hate the fact that their team could contemplate taking Joe Alt at line when they need so many other pieces, specifically losing their wide receiver. So I'm really fascinated. Ryan McChrystal, a mock draft expert, has been among the best in the country for years now. I'm really excited to see where does he end up having the Chargers go with the last mock that he submits on Wednesday night before the mocks on Thursday. Does he stick with them going for an offensive lineman, and Joe Alt in particular, or does he have them going somewhere else? But the Chargers, I think it's a great opportunity for them to kind of hit a reset. And I do want to take one quick walk back down memory lane for a second and say that I can't imagine what this team would have been like if they flip-flopped their decision to go with Brandon Staley and instead took Brian Daboll and then let Brandon Staley go coach the Giants with Daniel Jones at quarterback and let Brandon Staley try to figure out how to win with that defense rather than Brian Daboll, an offensive guru, trying to work with that crappy offense and what Dave Gettleman left him on that side of the ball, as opposed to him being able to work with what they had in LA. That decision from ownership to go with Brandon Staley made no sense to me at the time. And as the days and years go by, it only furthers the point that that was one of the dumbest coaching hires that I can remember, given what was available on the open market. Now, Brian Daboll obviously hasn't proven his excellence with what he's got in New York, but he may never get that opportunity to. We'll see what they end up doing at their quarterback position. As it relates to the Chargers, they have the second largest year-over-year increase in ease of any team. They played the sixth toughest schedule last year and the second easiest this year. They have the fourth most draft capital based on our calculations. I mean, it's just a great opportunity. Last year, obviously, we know they were terrible. They were injured. They went 0-8 versus teams that made the playoffs. They went 5-4 versus teams that finished below 500. I think they've got more opportunities. They play only 7 games next year versus teams that are predicted to have a winning record. So right there, you've got just upside based upon your schedule. You've got a new coaching staff, and we know Jim Harbaugh, his track record from when he coached with the San Francisco 49ers. He took a team in San Francisco that was off of 8 straight losing seasons, and in his first year, he took them to 13-3 in the conference championship. He exceeded the win total for the 49ers in all 3 of his first 3 seasons as the head coach there. Can he do the same with the Chargers? You know, their win total right now is 8.5. With juice, it's an implied 8.9, which is down from what it was last year. They've got more holes, but they also have an easier schedule. So I think they're a fascinating team to see what they're going to do with all this draft capital, having the 4th most. And then, you know, how does that translate into the win totals markets as we get into the summer and I start writing up this team to try to get a good feel as to what I think that they're going to do in terms of how they finish the 2024 season.
Warren mentioned the Ryan's draft coming out on Wednesday. Make sure that across the board, whatever team you're trying to look into, that you're checking out our articles, the biggest 2024 draft needs and predictions for each of the 32 NFL teams. Keep it locked to all of those over on sharpfootballanalysis.com. They'll continue to come out all the way up until draft day. I know Rich and Ray have been working super hard on them, and they've got a ton of great information in there. Make sure you're keeping it locked to all of our socials as well, Sharp Football Analysis. Guys, let's move on from these teams that just need so much, but do have the draft capital to kind of fill those holes. And let's move on to a team in a little bit of a unique situation. It's the Cincinnati Bengals, obviously coming off the Burrow injury and Jake Browning spending the, latter half of last season as their QB1. They've got 10 picks in this year's draft, including number 18 in the first round. They lose a big offensive lineman in Jonah Williams. They lose 2 big defensive pieces in Chidobe Awuzie and DJ Reader. But that said, this is a team that the story kind of continues to be the same for them headed into this season, and that is protect Joe Burrow and keep him from getting injured, because obviously it didn't happen last season. It's been a story all the way since they were playing in the Super Bowl is can Joe Burrow get that protection? Back then it was Andrew Whitworth, and now we're looking at who the next offensive lineman could be coming in to Cincinnati. Rich, I guess my thing is with the Bengals, how are they going to ultimately address this? Is it through the draft? Is it through free agency? And does it make how is it going to affect the impact of each of these players? When you're talking about your Jamars, you're talking about your Burrows. Obviously, the T. Higgins situation still kind of up in the air. He requested the trade, then said that he wanted to stay in Cincinnati. What's your takeaway from them projecting an offensive lineman in the first round?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to take an offensive lineman either, personally. I mean, I think that they bought themselves at least a gap not to. Having Trent Brown replace Jonah Williams is an upgrade. Now, he only signed a 1-year contract, so you can say the contractual depth may push them to just draft a guy, not play him, bring him along slowly. But Trent Brown is a better football player than Jonah Williams. It bears out in every single metric since Jonah Williams has entered the NFL and Trent Brown has played. Now, Trent Brown just needs to stay on the football field. But you look at the Cincinnati Bengals, they had their starting 5 offensive linemen around the field for 96% of the snaps last year. It's the highest rate in the league. They were number 1 in offensive line continuity. The only guy they lost was Jonah Williams from that starting group, and they replaced him with arguably a better player. So I don't even think that it's necessary that they just bought themselves the opportunity. I don't know what's going to be available at 18, but they kind of have a wide open board. Now, Burrow is in the heart of his contract now, right? Which kind of will keep the theme going, and because Burrow is now in the span where his contract spikes, we're starting to see the hard decisions like this team has to make. You can't retain a DJ Reader, right? You can't retain a Chidobe Awuzie. You can't offer T. Higgins a contract extension yet, because you know what? They have to pay Jamar Chase next. Jamar Chase's contract is also up, and he's just waiting to see what Justin Jefferson gets before that negotiation goes into vote. You have to let a Joe Mixon go when you have a Joe Burrow, in that contract. Like, these are the things that happen. And so the Bengals are in this spot now where they have to find players now that are going to produce as rookies, because they need those contracts to hit with that value. So I think it's a wide open board for them. They need a lot of guys. This is another team, like their secondary that they rolled over. Like, it's just not the strongest. They had 2 new safeties in Geno Stone and Von Bell. Von Bell is kind of more of like an ancillary piece. Geno Stone will definitely start. You talk about they lose DJ Reader. They have a lot of needs. Tyler Boyd's gone. This is the team that actually needs a wide receiver, which is funny to think about, right? Like, it's hilarious to think about. And then do they feel good about what they have at running back with Zach Moss and Chase Brown? Do they feel good about having Mike Gesicki at tight end with Tanner Hudson? Like, there's still a lot of needs here. I don't think offensive tackle is a slam dunk here. I think that Orlando Brown and Trent Brown, the combination of those two, buys them the option to say, like, they don't have to force tackle, though.
What's interesting to me from just an odds perspective about this, the Bengals are 9-1 to take a wide receiver, and they're 9-1 to take a tight end, and running back is even further down the list than that. Like Rich is talking about, they do need a wide receiver with the Chase contract coming up, obviously. Why would, in this stacked wide receiver class, why would they not take a shot? I know we're going long, Rich. I just wanted to get through one last quick thing with you, because there's a team that we have on here to talk about, and I feel like their situation is so unique, especially regarding fantasy. It's the Denver Broncos. Obviously, Russell leaving. They've got 12 overall in this draft, and to go along with 7 other picks, so 8 total, leading off with the 12th overall. They're favored to take a quarterback. What do we think that this does to that offense as a whole? Does it make them something that we could look more into, as they might have a quarterback on a rookie deal who could produce for them? Or does it make you want to stay away more because we don't know what this could bring?
The Broncos probably are in the most interesting spot, I think, than any team in the draft. Of all the teams that I've done, they have by far the least inspiring roster right now. I don't think they have the worst roster, but like definitely the least inspiring roster of any team done so far. I mean, they don't have a quarterback. They really don't have any strength of the roster at all. Like some of their best players are also against the contract edge here. Garrett Bowles, Patrick Surtain, Quinn Meinerz. Like some of the few guys that they've had develop, they have to extend and give big money to. And they still have so many holes outside of that. They don't have a second round pick, obviously, for the Sean Payton trade. And if they're going to try to force quarterback in a year where they don't even have draft capital to address all these other needs, where does that put them, right? I mean, to me, the most obvious thing seems to just punt, be bad, get more draft picks, then attack the quarterback. Because here's the problem. If you stay put and take a quarterback where they're picking, we're not talking about them taking the first quarterback in the draft, the second quarterback in the draft, right. The third. We're not even talking about them taking probably the fourth quarterback in this draft. You're going to settle for the QB5 in a draft. And, it just feels like that would be like an egregious mistake by them, especially when we get to the other guys like the Bo Nixes and the Michael Penix, who are these guys that had an extra year because of COVID and are, approaching almost to be 25-year-old rookies. If either one of these guys go in the first round, the only quarterbacks to go in the first round older than both Michael Penix and Bo Nix, who are only weeks apart in age, are Brandon Weeden, Carson Palmer, and Jason Campbell. And Carson Palmer was the number one pick in the draft, right? Like when you look at other 24-year-old rookies that went in the first round, we've got Kenny Pickett, Chad Pennington, Joey Harrington, Carson Wentz, Ryan Tannehill. And you have Joe Burrow, who is obviously the abject hit. But again, Joe Burrow was the QB1 in the class. You're taking the QB1. The Bengals to settle, or the Broncos to settle for the QB5, the QB6, and have it be a guy that you have to reach for potentially. I mean, I couldn't think of a worse way to team build, especially in a year where you have, bottom third draft capital and just holes everywhere. There's literally not a position of strength on the Denver Broncos right now. So, I mean, I think it'd be an egregious for them to stay put and to force quarterback where they're picking. Now they could trade down, get more picks, and maybe take Bo Nix or Michael Penix like the bottom of round one, right? Something like that. But to them to take that quarterback where they're picking right now, it would just be, I think, a colossal miss for this roster because that quarterback's not going to have anything either.
100%. And you're talking about reaching for the fifth best player in a position group with the 12th overall pick in the draft, and it's not wide receivers in this draft. I think if you're talking wide receivers, maybe that'd be justifiable, but even then, no. Warren, over to you. To Rich's point about something really quick, he's talking about this is a team that has a great opportunity to be bad. And in the NFL today, that's something that is widely acceptable, I think. And it's a proven system. You can be bad to get good. When we talk about this team's strength of schedule, though, and we can get it pulled back up here, this is a team that is top 5 in implied strength of schedule heading into this season. Is this going to make it harder for them to, as we're calling it, be bad or, not tank, because that's an NBA restricted thing. But is it going to be harder for them to not be as good to try and gain more draft capital for future years? Even
when you have an easier schedule than people think that you have, it's still hard to win games in the NFL. Like teams do not just give away games in the NFL. So I firmly agree that the strategy should be, let's get this roster where it needs to get. And you're not going to do that by reaching on players, trading up to get players. You don't have a lot of draft capital. For years, the Denver Broncos were above average. I'm looking here at one of the charts. I'm going to tweet this out later today because I did a study on draft capital. For years, this team had above average draft capital going all the way back from like 2017 to 2021. They were well above average in draft capital virtually every single year. Last 3 years, their draft capital has stunk. They've had poor draft capital, well below average. This year, they're at 21. And absolutely, this is a team. You've got Sean Payton, your quarterback. He has a lot at quarterback. I just don't think that whoever they're going to get is going to be able to fill that void. It's a rough season. And if Sean Payton goes out there and tries to win and the front office tries to win in 2024, I think they're not going to have success, and then it's going to hurt them from their team building in 2025 and beyond. So I tend to agree with both of you guys.
All right. Well, we did it, guys. We covered a whole sixth of the league this afternoon. We went through 6 whole teams. And make sure that if we went through or we didn't go through a team that you did want to hear about, all 32 of our draft needs and draft previews are up on sharpfootballanalysis.com. Make sure you're checking those out. Don't forget that if you're looking for Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings, rookie rankings, projections for the 2024 season, and plenty more, make sure you're getting your Sharp Fantasy Football Draft Kit. Whether you're looking for season-long stuff, Dynasty Leagues, best ball format, whatever the case may be, the Sharp Fantasy Football Draft Kit features advanced analytics, and it's got data to help you uncover edges and draft those winning lineups. You can also use promo code SAVE5 for $5 off at sharpfootballanalysis.com. And hey, by the way, don't forget to pre-order Warren Sharp's 2024 football preview today. It is the #1 must-read resource to prepare for the 2024 NFL season. 50 plus full-color pages, dedicated chapters for all 32 NFL teams, season predictions, fantasy football analysis, betting odds, over 2,500 heat maps and data visualizations. It's simply the best analytical 2024 football preview that you can buy, and it's all yours right now at sharpfootballanalysis.com, where you can also get $5 off using that same promo code SAVE5. Again, it's SAVE, the number 5, when you're ordering your 2024 football preview book, when you're ordering your Sharp Fantasy Football Draft Kit. Check out all of our content, sharpfootballanalysis.com. Lots of great stuff over there for you. And if you just want something more than what you got out of this Sharp Angles podcast this afternoon, guys, I think that's pretty much all for us. We got through 6 great teams and what they could do in this draft. Lots of different directions for those 6 to go. I'm looking forward to it. This draft is going to be a great one. That will do it for us for this edition of the Sharp Angles podcast. Rich, Warren, thank you guys so much. Can't wait to do it again soon.
Absolutely. I do want to throw in last thing, guys, over at Sharp Football Analysis, all the stuff that Sam said, go over there, check out the mock drafts. We've got a Brandon's mock draft is coming up today. We've got Ryan's mock drafts coming up. Then they do their final mock drafts next Wednesday night. Submit those, publish them. Brendan currently is the #1 most accurate mock draft expert in the entire world right now through the Huddle Report rankings. He's #1 most accurate over the last 5 years. And then Ryan was number 2 or 3 just a couple of years ago. He's slipped a little bit, but he's still one of the handful of the most accurate mock drafters out there as well. Both those guys have their latest mocks up on the website. They're going to continue to post those. And the last one is going to come up Thursday morning on the website. We've got a draft props podcast that's going to be published next week. We're going to do a live show. We've got a couple of great guests on that one. We're going to be going through some of the draft props. And then, of course, Rich, Ray finishing up their content over at Sharp Football Analysis through all the team needs. You're going to find all 32 teams broken down there. So, I mean, we're all working overdrive, especially Rich and Ray, to get you the best draft content out there. It's going to be informative, actionable, and give you a preview for the season. We also hit you with strength of schedule and draft capital analysis in articles that I've written this past week. So just a ton of information for you over at Sharp Football Analysis. Go check it out. Go check out the draft kit. Go check out the book. Go buy those. SAVE5 is the code. Get yourself a little bit of savings in the process, and we'll see you next time.